Well, the first of two new reports raises questions over whether 81-year-old Joe Biden is mentally fit to serve. One is from the Wall Street Journal. You'll read it here. The title is Behind Closed Doors. Biden shows signs of slipping. These are from people who were in the room. 45 sources. That's a huge number. Democrats, Republicans, both sides of the aisle talking to the Wall Street Journal. Reveals the worrying new details that describe an aging president. And in a lengthy sit-down with Time magazine, President Biden is asked if he can still do the job of president as an 85-year-old man. The president shot back, quote, "I can do it better than anybody you know. You're looking at me. I can take you too." Whoa, defensive, just a little. And the Time reporter who interviewed him says it's clear he's not the Biden of 2020.
President Biden brushing off any concerns about his age. How did he seem to you?
I mean, he appears very much as he appears on TV. He is older than when he started in office. It's visible if you just look side by side on the tape. The transcript is a good place for people to go to assess that. You know, he was. We describe it in the piece as well. There's some sort of color description of how he appeared in there.
So this interview took place on May 28th. The reporters were with him for about 35 minutes for the interview, about 90 minutes overall. So a long-form look at the president ahead of what is likely his last foreign trip before the election. And here's what happened, Tammy. Biden forgot the last time he talked with Bibi Netanyahu. Biden mixed up Xi and Putin. Biden lost track of his CIA director. He didn't know where he was. He had to ask aides in the room. And Biden also confused. He forgot the African population had already exceeded 1 billion. That's a lot.
It is. When you're the president of the United States, you've got really kind of a parameter of the things that matter that you have to focus on. They're very important things, right? It's about humanity, but you're not worried about managing your household, when the water's going to get delivered, how the kids are getting to school, if you're going to get protein on the table. You have very few things you have to really worry about. And so I think this is why this kind of dynamic matters. How can you make decisions about what the future should be when you're not really connected with who a particular leader is, when you're mixing up countries, when you don't know the nature of a population of another country, when you've got world wars effectively, right? You've got threats of nuclear war. You've got the North and South Korea dynamic. You've got Russia and China. To not be able to connect the dots, even for a reasonable period of time, means you're not going to be able to make decisions or know. For those who are people say, well, he's not making the decisions, it doesn't matter. Or know if the people around you are making the correct decisions. That you're at least supposed to be the visionary. You're not supposed to be a micromanager. But to know if, in fact, the nation's being put in more harm, if you don't know what's going on around the world, and the world is looking at you, and that, of course, only enforces and inspires the bad guys even more.
Yeah, you know, the Wall Street Journal piece is quite something. These details, Emily, are notable. There was a January meeting about Ukraine. This is, again, the article, 45 sources, and here is what happened in the January meeting, according to those sources. He spoke so softly at times that some participants struggled to hear him. That was according to 5 people familiar with the meeting. He read from notes to make obvious points, paused for extended periods, sometimes closed his eyes for so long, some in the room wondered whether he had tuned out. There was a February meeting where Mike Johnson expressed his hesitancy about an energy policy, and Biden said, no, that's just a study we're doing. It's not a study, it's a policy. White House disputes that. Kevin McCarthy said, this isn't the man I know. These are people in the room.
And so when the White House responds and said this is clearly, quote, politically motivated, it sort of begs the question, but these 45 people are Democrats. And it's taken over time, right? So at what point does this either A, indicate a fissure within the Democrat Party or some type of coup, or maybe the emperor's new clothes and enough people see the writing on the walls that they're just like, look, we can't lie about it anymore. And you add that on top of, for example, the recent DOJ filings, which now admit that they cleaned up all the ums and the spaces and the ahs and the stuttering and everything from the president's interviews with Ben-Hur. And you know, ironically, in that release, that's with their filing saying, well, we don't want to release anymore because we don't want to damage the integrity of the investigation. You also add on his interview with Time magazine, who also admitted not only did they have to fact check a million claims, they put in a ton of editor's notes. And then when the editor himself was interviewed on CNN, he was described as evasive at best when they were asking him him about the president's acuity. So in the micro sense, every single interaction with a president is whitewashed to make him look his best. And look, we all do that in journalism. You're not going to include a like or an I'm sure. But the depth to which he is being protected and his mental acuity elevated is cause for concern. So when those 45 people come out and say, enough is enough, we all see it with our own two eyes, I think it's too far gone now.
Can I just say something about that? The whitewashed. You are so right. His 2 trips to the border.
Yes.
I mean, you could not have whitewashed El Paso anymore. You took the people off the street so he didn't have to see it. He's seen other areas that were cleaned up for his protection. No wonder taking a single executive order in his mind would fix a problem that he's never really seen because it was whitewashed. That was so well put. And now he's faced with a situation where an audio tape could get out. And not all journalists would take out the likes and the ums, just because look at what they could show. Yeah. And that's why you've got a press now that are backing the idea of, yeah, I think everybody would like to see the tape. I mean, we all want to see, well, what was it really like to be in the room with him when Robert Hur comes out and says this man couldn't even make it through a trial? Well, what are we going to do for the next few months while he's president? I mean, that's what crosses my mind.
Yeah, you know, the White House, to the Wall Street Journal article, I want to read part of their response. And these sources, some were Republicans, some were Democrats. But the White House response was this: now in 2024, House Republicans are making false claims as a political tactic that flatly contradict previous statements. So this is all House Republicans, except it's not. Let's pull up the article. 45 sources. This article is based on interviews with more than 45 people over several months. The interviews were with Republicans and Democrats who either participated in meetings with Biden or were briefed on them contemporaneously, including administration officials and other Democrats. The part I'm interested in, David, is the part that comes after this. This is shocking to me, and it goes to your point about whitewashing, Emily. The White House kept close tabs on some of the Wall Street Journal's interviews with Democratic lawmakers after the offices of several Democrats shared with the White House recordings of an interview or details about what were asked. Some of the lawmakers spoke to the Journal a second time to emphasize Biden's strengths. They just, you know, said, I should give you a call back, said Gregory Meeks. I bring this up. The White House is creating a Truman Show for us. You remember the Truman Show?
Analogy.
It's a carefully crafted, beautiful city. Everything seems perfect, except there's a puppeteer at the top. The White House is a puppeteer. They got mad at Merrick Garland because Merrick Garland allowed the Robert Hur report to come out. They are mad when audio tapes get out. We can't see him in long form. We can't hear the 90 minutes of time interview or the 35 minutes. They need a Truman Show for Joe Biden to get reelected.
Yeah, I mean, you know, to the point of editing, I don't edit. I don't edit anyone. Look, you edit out a sneeze, you edit out something, but you want to hear the full context of someone's reference points. If you think about it, this is an administration that has a history that goes back to Obama of spying on reporters. James Rosen, for example.
Great point.
You have the weaponization of agencies against the press. You've got social media. You've got collusion, real collusion between the tech giants and the White House. You've got the force of federal regulation being used on banks. This is modus operandi for the Democrats in big government. Joe Biden, they're just protecting him to protect their power because their goal is America. Their goal is not just Donald Trump or the Republicans. They want control. And when you have someone who's incapable, I'll ask the American people this question. So let me put this one to you. Would you let Joe Biden drive you to the grocery store?
No.
No, that's a
no.
great question.
Okay, people can analyze. I don't judge from a distance. I'm not a doctor. I'm not a psychiatrist.
None of us.
I'm not a medical expert. But I ask a common sense question. Would you let Joe Biden drive you to the grocery store?
I certainly
would you let your
wouldn't get on a bike
grandfather
with
in
him.
that case? Well, but that's my point.
Or babysit your daughter, your toddler.
Well, look, I just one last point because Africa was mentioned. I just got back from Africa. I was on vacation. Speaking to people in South Africa, in Zimbabwe, and others, they're asking questions about Joe Biden. People in other countries are paying attention. My guide, my drivers, the other people, the Rangers, they're talking about this. It's not just an American problem.
So foreign citizens are asking about Joe Biden, and Joe Biden wants you to believe that all foreign leaders are fearful of Donald Trump. Maybe they are, because he'll make them pay their fair share at NATO.
Hey everyone, I'm Emily Campagno. Catch me and my co-hosts Harris Faulkner and Kayleigh McEnany on Outnumbered every weekday at 12 p.m. Eastern, or set your DVR. Also, don't forget to subscribe to the Fox News YouTube page for daily highlights.